All right. Welcome everybody to the first co-hosted webinar of Cloudwoods and Cloudberry Lab. I'm very excited to welcome you all here in this webinar. And today, well, we are, of course, going to talk about backups. And we go way back in terms of backups with Cloudwoods because we started as a website reviewing the best online backup solutions and cloud storage solutions. And Cloudberry and Cloudwoods, we have a long-term relationship because we have partnered in terms of how we review the software and how we review backup services, because Cloudberry is a little bit different than other cloud backup services that Cloudwoods reviews because they do not offer storage themselves, but they enable users to back up to any cloud storage service. Therefore, people that do want to use Cloudberry Lab, they do not log themselves into a particular system because they are more flexible when it comes to their backup choice and their backup organization. We have a lot to cover here in this webinar. We're going to talk about why backup is important in the first place. We're going to talk about backup strategies, on-site, off-site, the 3-2-1 principle. We're going to go a little bit into security as well. And we have also a special guest who has a lot of experience with Cloudberry Backup and his company, Steve. And he also is going to talk a little bit about his experience and can give you some practical advice on how to use that software and how to use that maybe for your clients. So the host of this webinar is Eugene Rudziński. He is a solutions architect from Cloudberry Lab, and this man knows a lot about backup. And I'm very happy to welcome you, Eugene, here to the webinar, and thank you very much for organizing it with us.
Absolutely, Mauricio. Good morning, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for that introduction. And I think before we go into the backup discussion, we have few administrative things that we need to admit here. So Mauricio, I'll let you do that.
Yes. So first of all, obviously, we would like to know a little bit about who you are, who's attending the webinar, so we can maybe shorten a couple of the sections that that we've planned, and also we're going to record the webinar so that we can publish a replay later, and for the people who missed the webinar, or if you want to review it on your own pace later on. And obviously we have a questions and comments box. So whenever you feel something is not clear or you have a question along the webinar, feel free to post something in the question box. And after each chapter, we can pause a little bit and answer all of your questions. So Eugene, why don't you start with a poll for the audience?
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you. So the first poll that we're going to launch right now, this. So what type of files do you want to back up on the cloud? And you can use the GoToWebinar tool just to provide the answer for us. So that's actually going to give us very clear vision of what exactly you expecting to see from that particular webinar. So we give you a few minutes just to go through the question.
Yeah, so as it stands now, we have a pretty good divide between people that are looking for personal files for their own computers and business files and maybe server files, and also several voted on the clients files as well. So yeah, that's an interesting result.
Okay, I think with that we can just go to the theoretical part, followed by a practical part, and obviously there will be Steve talk about his experience with backup tools and what exactly he loves in Cloudberry. So let's just get started. Okay, so I actually decided to skip the first part about the backup because, well, backup is very important, right? So backup is just a way to, to keep copies of your files, and in case of accident or in case of any, corruptions of those files, we can get access to those files from the backup. So essentially, we can recover data, we can recover a set of, files, or the particular system, or whatever we have placed into the backup. So instead of talking about backup, what I decided to do is actually go through a number of key things around the backup. And I'd like to start from the backup terminology. So what we actually see when we talk about backup. So there are a few important things. When we talk about systems, we may talk about different approaches for backing up those systems. So it can be either hot backup or cold backup, depends on the system state. And again, so the example of hot backup is when you, let's say, run operating system, and the operating system serves some applications, and we just during that run provide the backup. So we backup set of files for the entire application. So this is an example of hot backup. So the cold backup is just the way to protect files where, when, for example, system is down, or system is in maintenance mode, or system is switched off, right? So moving forward, I'd like to talk about different backup types. We know about full backup, which is essentially the way to copy entire system, and what we have as a result is just a complete copy of our files or application or the entire system at the backup destination. However, when we talk about budgeting, when we talk about storage consumption, when we talk about the things like retention policy, we may want to get something else rather than just full backup. And that's why we have incremental backup, reverse incremental backup, or differential backup. So I will cover those things as well just in a few minutes. So there are also terms like backup window or and backup plan. So backup window essentially is the time scope. Within that time scope, we actually need to make a backup, or we we're about to make a backup. So essentially, that's the time. During that time, we have our process up and running and doing its job. So the backup plan, or we may hear something like a backup task, or we may hear something like a backup job. It's actually the action itself. So the either script or the application task that takes our backup and takes our files and makes copy of that file and places them somewhere else. So essentially, it contains a number of steps, and this is what we call backup plan, or backup task, or again backup job. So there are also quite important things. It's like recovery time objective, recovery point objective, or RTO and RPO. I'll talk about these terms later, just in a few slides. We're going to be talking about on-site and off-site backup. So essentially, it's the way or the place where we store our backups, and they actually are part of the strategy. So there are also things like compression, deduplication, and encryption. So these things, or these technologies, play a very important role in the backup activities and the backup approaches, and we will be covering those things as well. So moving forward. So let's talk about the types of backups and why this is important. Again, having full full copy of our files or systems somewhere on the storage is essentially called full backup. So when we take this information, when we take the folder, or when we take set of files and copy them across to the storage. So essentially, this is called full backup. So we may apply compression, we may apply encryption on top, but this actually gives us the point for the restore. And again, when we start talking about, or when we start thinking about storage consumption, or storage budgeting, we actually start thinking about something else. And let's say we run the system, and that system has significant changes during the time. For example, we run the backup on daily basis every 24 hours, and the system has some changes. And like what actually can help us to make a backup, but consume less space on the storage, is something other than full backup, and that's why we have incremental, differential, and reverse incremental. So if you take a look at the table here in that slide, you can see the storage consumption for at least full, incremental, and differential backups. So the reverse incremental looks similar to incremental, but the technology itself and the way it works is just to easily explain, it's kind of like the reverse incremental, where we have full backup generated all the time. But for the latest restart point, it actually generates just changes since the last backup. It's a bit tough to understand, but it's quite popular in the technology, especially in the tools, and sometimes it's really good technology to have. As most of the time when you restore your systems, you actually get access to your latest backup, and as reverse incremental generates full backup on every run basis, so the reverse incremental makes sense here. But let's get back to incremental and differential and take a look at that, these two options. So incremental, what exactly it does? So incremental essentially takes only changed data from the last backup, right? So initially, we at the first column right here on that example in Sunday, we have 2 TB of data, and each backup method actually generated first run 2 TB of data on the storage. It can be less, it can be more. Depends on the dupe technology, depends on the compression technology, if we use any. But anyway, so just to simplify the example, so at the first run, we actually generate a full set of files. We actually copy a full set of files, and this is what we call full backup. Then next day, again, back to my example, like we do backup on a 24 hours basis, so essentially daily backup. So the next run for the full backup, we're going to have another 2 TB of data, just because it's called full, and it's going to take the entire set of files and copy them over to the storage. If you take a look at the incremental, so the incremental is going to be less, and incremental will reflect only changed blocks or changed files from the system. So essentially, what incremental is going to do is going to analyze the entire set of the files that we set for our backup as a source, and we'll analyze the changed files. So we'll actually take only changed files, deliver them to the backup storage, and make a mark in the backup software or in the backup SDK or whatever we use. So essentially, it will refer to the first backup, to the first full backup, and it will just reflect the changed data. Okay. So differential for the second run is going to be pretty the same. So it's going to reflect changes since last full backup. However, when we take a look at the Tuesday, when we have the third column here, so the Tuesday is going to give us another full of 2 TB. So incremental is going to generate changes since since last incremental, that will contain changed information from Monday, and that will actually contain difference between Monday state, and so that will actually include also changes and data that we have backed up on Monday. And as you can see, 1.2 gigs of changed files. This is what we have on Tuesday. So essentially, incremental will contain Monday's data, and will contain Tuesday's changes. So essentially, 1.2 gigs will reflect Monday plus Tuesday changes. When differential, if we take a look at the differential, we're going to see less storage consumption, which is just 200 megabytes, and this actually will reflect changes since initial full. And if you take a look at the table, you may want to select differential, as actually it consumes less storage on the backup destination. However, differential might be risky, just because it actually depends on the entire chain. So if you get some corruptions in one of the points, let's say we are looking at the Friday restore point, and we lost something from Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, so the entire chain of backup set might be broken, and this actually can give us some headache for the restore. So that's why when we think about types of backup, when we think about what to select, what approach to use, we actually need to measure. So what is important for us? What mode we use? Do we have enough budget? Is that data mission critical? Should we go that mode? Should we go this mode, etc., and so on and so forth.
There's one question related to that slide. Maybe we can just pop that in. So Philip asks that it's a little unclear exactly how much data is actually changing per day. So it'd be nice to show the true capacity of changed files per day, and then the incremental values would make a little more sense. He states.
Okay. Yeah. So I absolutely agree. So this is very rough example. It's table that reflects numbers. However, yeah, when we talk about incremental or differential, well, it actually depends on the backup mode and the backup source. We may backup, let's say, just set of files, or we may backup the entire system, where we're gonna start talking about blocks. We may backup virtual machines, and we may talk about, like virtual machines block, and it's something else. So in that table, I just wanted to avoid some particular backup mode or some particular backup approach. I wanted to talk about, just want to talk about the numbers and what are the benefits to have, let's say, full versus incremental versus differential, just to give more clear way, how much each particular backup type consumes on the storage. But thanks, yeah. So I'll try in one of my next slides, and maybe in the practice part, I'll try to demonstrate uh, you know, at least the incremental part here. Thank you for the question. So moving on to the retention and versioning. So the retention policy, it generally is called retention policy. Is quite important for the backup strategy, and for the backup process overall. So the retention policy essentially describes the rules when we have to start removing all the data, because when we back up data on schedule basis, and let's say we decided that we want to do that every 24 hours, like on my first example, and we want to do that during the entire month, and then after that month we want to, let's say, to start deleting eldest copies, and this is what can be said in the retention policy rules. So we actually decide the backup duration. Sorry, the backup retention policy. We set to 1 month, and we just decide the frequency. So if we run that on automated basis, we just set the diary for the backup. So we see normally in organizations, or even in the consumers part, we see that people normally stick with overnight backup or over the weekend backup. So that actually depends on the type of backup, type of services that we protect. We don't really want to influence on the employers' activities if we talk about organizations, and so it's also part of the retention policy. So we essentially decide when this should run, how many times per day or per week, and when we should start to purge the eldest copies, when we should start to remove the eldest points for the restore, and so this is what we call retention. And again, so this either can be set by the organization policies, like internal policies, based on the based on the system and how critical that system, and this can be set individually based on our personal requirements. Let's say we back up the family photo album, and we just want to make sure that we have new copies of the photos handled by the backup system, and we don't really want to make anything with all our eldest copies. So we can just set the forever incremental retention policy, where just updates will come into the backup set and will be saved in the storage, and we're not gonna breach anything on the storage at all. It's just an example. There might be various different options. So let's move on, and yep. So let's talk about the strategy. So what we know about the strategy. So well, ideally, right? So ideally, we'd like to back up everything all the time and keep everything forever. But we can't really do that, and the reason is that there might be not enough storage, there might be not enough budget for that storage, there might be there might be something else, and that's why there are two major strategies that we can see. So the first is for, let's say, for getting access to the data as fast as possible, and generally, people prefer to call them short-term backup strategy, where, let's say, we define the storage account. It can be something in the local network, like network attached storage. It's quite a popular solution. Or it can be let's say, if we have fast internet, we can set up one of the cloud storage provider and can back up to that storage provider. It doesn't really matter. So the idea of short-term retention policy is to get access to the set of backups as fast as possible, and the short-term backup policy usually addresses the short retention policy. When we have, let's say, set of backup which is set up, to keep last week changes in our system, and we can get access to either deleted data or corrupted or missing objects as fast as possible. And again, so the example of short-term retention storage account can be, like network attached storage sitting locally, or again, it can be a cloud provider. The other strategy is actually long-term strategy. And we see that long-term strategy usually in systems which require audit. So, for example, you run the company, or you have business, and that business requires to keep your documents for, let's say, for 7 years, or 5 years, 7 years, up to 15 years. And so the long-term retention policy dictates, okay, so that we set up the backup plan or the backup task that reflects changes for these 7 years. So usually you don't really want to make very high frequency of that backups. You prefer probably to stick with let's say 1 point per month, or there is also a good term called GFS, or grandfather father son retention policy, when we can define backups, let's say on weekly basis, or monthly basis, quarterly basis, yearly basis, and all these backup changes can be reflected in our backup storage, and we can get access for audit purpose, for example, from that long-term backup strategy. Again, it's just an example, and that example is great way to explain the long-term strategy, when we just need to get access to our eldest copy, and GFS is one of the let's say way to set that long-term strategy. One thing that we actually the approach, the 3-to-1 approach, this is something that we hear, and like backup admins and IT admins usually talk about 3-to-1 strategy. So this term actually came from photography, and so essentially the principle of 3-to-1 strategy is quite simple. It actually states that you need 3 copies of your data in 2 different places with at least one offsite. Okay, so offsite, what does it mean? So the example of offsite backup can be, let's say another data center, or it can be a secondary storage destination. Let's say we have two network attached storages sitting locally, and one, NAS is used for short-term backup strategy. We save data on that NAS for weekly retentions, for weekly recovery. And the other NAS, we just fulfill by, let's say, by data during the months, by, let's say, weekly copies. So after 1 month of backup strategy for long-term for that second NAS, we have 4 copies. And we just bring that NAS somewhere else on the other data center, to the other, office, to the branch office. We see that, example, like, for example, you have company and there are 2 offices, like one is headquarters, the other one is branch office. So the on-site backup is going to be for the headquarters, for the local NAS, and when we bring the second NAS to the branch office, so that's going to call offsite backup. Yeah, so just an example of offsite backup. And having, let's say, 2 NAS boxes sitting in 2 different locations is just great way to explain 3-to-1 strategy. So we have 2 sites, but we have 2 copies for now, so we're just missing third copy, and that third copy can be uploaded to the cloud, for example. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So yeah, on my first slide, I mentioned 2 very important terms. So RTO and RPO. So these 2 terms are, mostly about the recovery. And so the first, recovery time objective, reflects how system can be restored. How fast system can be restored. Or let me rephrase it. So the RTO actually, reflects the duration of time during that time the system should be up and running after disaster. And the RTO is set by either IT organization or by yourself. If we run the backup for, let's say, for our personal data, so we can just define, okay, so what happened if I miss my objects, if I miss my original data, so will I be good to go if I can recover that data within, let's say, 1 hour. So this is actually RTO example. And the recovery point objective, usually, so the recovery point objective is the amount of data that we can, drop just because of the frequency of backup, just because of the data that has been backed up, and then we face the problem. And when we try to get restore data, but the problem happens somewhere in the middle between frequencies. And so essentially, the recovery point objective directly depends on the product capability, as you can see here. So it actually directly refers to the backup frequency. So how frequently we do our backup runs. And it's just the period of time on which data can be or might be lost due to accident, right? So let's move on. So talking about the different options available from the cloud perspective, from the backup strategies perspective. So just to wrap up everything that I mentioned here. So we have on-site backup, where a good example is our local network attached storage, and that's really good, clear, and not that complicated to set up. So just to wrap up everything that has been mentioned here. So we have three, let's say, major backup destination, let's go this way. So on-site, off-site, and cloud, right? And I just want to highlight some of the key benefits and drawbacks that we have against each. So, for example, the on-site backup, it's just really easy to set up, very cheap. Again, so the good example can be network attached storage. So we put it to the local network and start our backup plans. So that's fine, but it actually does not really protect us against site failures. general failures. So if we face any issues with either that storage or with the entire site, we can't really get anything from there. So the offsite backup. So the offsite backup, one of the benefit of offsite backup is that it can protect against the site failures. So that's why it's actually makes sense, and we see the offsite backup strategy in many organizations. So what they essentially set up is just two sites, or at least the on-site backup they set up for the NAS box, and then the offsite they set up either to the branch office, or they use something else, like for example the cloud, like you can see here on that screen. And the cloud. So this is what we as Cloudberry provide, and this is what we can do very good. So the cloud essentially doesn't really have any limitations from the let's say from the storage capacity. We don't really need to plan in advance what to purchase and how much capacity we're gonna need next year, or following months, just to have all our backups set up accordingly with required retention policy, with required backup strategy, and backup type. So cloud is actually scalable anytime, scale up and scale down. So if we need to back up the entire system, that will contain a number of incremental, or if you want to set up the grandfather father son retention policy, so that's not a problem to go, because again, so it's scalable, and we just use the storage as much as we want. So we just need to keep an eye on the budget, on the storage consumption, and the rates per gigabyte or per terabyte, depends on the storage provider and the price model. So with that, I'm just gonna check quickly if we have any questions.
No questions so far. Maybe we wait just 30 seconds to give everybody the chance to maybe think about a question that he or she may have. Okay, Atul, for example, is asking how to back up data from his computer. He doesn't own a business, but he wants to know how to best back up data from his, I suppose, his computer. I think we're going to cover that now in the Cloudberry demo, and I think you're going to go over a couple of the cloud storage services that can plug into Cloudberry Backup to use it more efficiently, or most efficiently, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be covered just in a few minutes. So that's going to be practice part where we're going to take a look at the product.
Okay, there's another question by Amarachi. He did not understand exactly the difference between on-site and off-site. Maybe you could just give a very short example again.
Yes, absolutely. So the example on-site backup is quite simple, and you may run it even today. Is when let's take just a really decent example. We have local computer, let's say our home computer, and we have few files on that computer that are very important for us. So we plug in the USB drive into that computer, make a copy of that files, and that's actually it. So that's just an example of the on-site backup. Again, if we take a look at more serious example, we may run company, and we want to make a on-site backup for that company. So the very simple way will be to set up network attached storage, or primarily called NAS. So network attached storage is just a bunch of disks and controller which is attached to the network. And so this black box is our storage. And again, we set up backup plans to backup files or systems to that NAS box, and that's it. So we have that NAS sitting on site, sitting in our company location, in our company data center, in our company room, whatever. And this is example of on-site backup. And the on-site backup is good, but the drawback is that we can't really protect our systems from the site failures. So what will happen if we, have our main headquarters burned out, or there is a fire in the data center, in the IT room? So this NAS is actually burned out and there is no way to get access to this data. And that's why the offsite backup is a good way to protect your data. So the offsite backup is when you set up separate, again, so exactly the same example with network attached storage. So you set up second NAS box, you put it to a separate data center or to your branch office or somewhere else. So essentially it's gonna be somewhere else, not in your major office. And you set up your backup plans accordingly to that, to the secondary NAS. So you're gonna have your copies of your data somewhere else on the other NAS. And so this example, this particular offsite backup is going to protect your overall infrastructure, even if you get the complete failure in your first site. Because again, if your first site burns out and your first NAS burns out, but you actually have access you actually have your data sitting on the second NAS, and you just bring it back to your headquarters, set everything accordingly and start to restart. So just a quick example. So hope this answered the question. And with that, I'm just moving to the Cloudberry part because, we got a few questions about how to set up and how to protect personal computer. So just a few words about Cloudberry. So Cloudberry is the software company which is available since 2008. So primarily we are focused on backup tools with with target to the cloud providers. The first product that we made in 2008 was File Manager, and we still have it in our portfolio. It's called Cloudberry Explorer. It's just a great product for exchanging files, for copying files across to the cloud storage. You'll see that in my demo part. In 2011, we joined a really big market, and we started to provide tools and services for service providers. So essentially, we have a great product which is called MBS, or Managed Backup Service, which is just a backup as a service solution for, or backup as a service platform for service providers with centralized management, monitoring, and different other things. So we're not going to cover MBS today. We're going to talk about agents and consumer products. So that's why with that I'd like to introduce my one of our most valuable customer, Steve, who retired in 2013 from a Fortune 500 firm as a director of storage and backup after spending 40 years in IT, and he now manages the cloud solution service for PC Wizard. It's a small company service provider owned by his son, and he's just gonna express some thoughts and share some thoughts and experience working with Cloudberry. Steve?
Great, thanks, Eugene. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I can hear you.
Terrific. Well, thanks for giving me the chance to share my experiences with Cloudberry Backup. About 3 years ago, I was tasked with finding a cloud backup product to replace the one that we'd been using for our 75 business clients. We were having issues with reliability, manageability, and cost. So after evaluating about a dozen or so products, we ended up selecting Cloudberry Backup because it met or exceeded all of our criteria. I won't bore you all with a comprehensive list, but I'll give you just a highlight of a few of the key considerations that led us to choose Cloudberry. The first, and the one you've already spoken about, Eugene, is a key advantage that we're able to choose any back-end storage that we want. We currently send all of our clients' data to 2 cloud locations because most of them don't have a second site. So in order to keep with the strategy of the 3 different copies, we have 1 locally, and we send 2 to the cloud. So we send 1 copy to Amazon and another copy to Google. And we actually migrate the data from Amazon to a product they called Glacier, which has an extremely low cost after 120 days. So overall, our total cost of storage, when you combine it, is only 2 cents per gigabyte per month. Our prior product was costing us 35 to 40 cents per gig per month. And we now have over 35 terabytes of client data in the cloud. So you can see that represents a substantial savings for us. And combined with the reasonable cost of the Cloudberry software, we're able to offer our clients extremely affordable backup pricing. Another feature that was particularly important to us from a compliance perspective was client-side encryption. Very few products had the capability to have an encryption key that only the customer and, of course, us, the provider, would have access to. That means that if something were to happen with Amazon or Google, if they got hacked, somebody got access to the data, it would be of no value to whoever obtained it because they wouldn't have that encryption key. Excuse me. And the same goes for Cloudberry. Cloudberry has no access to it. They provide the software, but they don't have access to the data. And that was a particularly powerful feature for us. Another one, somewhat obscure, but nonetheless important, is bandwidth throttling. Some of our clients have extremely slow upload speeds. You know, you're talking 1 to 3 megabits per second. So it takes a long time for particularly the initial backup to go. And so one of the key features is that Cloudberry gives us the capability to set up rules that says that, say, from 7 o'clock in the morning till 5 p.m. in the afternoon, don't consume more than, half a megabit. But from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., you can do 1 megabit, and then after, 7 p.m., you can do the full bandwidth. At the time we were doing the evaluation, no other products had that level of flexibility in their product. And the last one I'll mention is the flexibility and retention periods. Eugene started to talk about this, but our standard retention is 90 days for all of our customers, but we have several clients in the tax and accounting business who want specific sets of data to be retained for 13 months or even longer. The reason is they don't access these files very often, so they may not actually detect a deleted or a corrupted file within that standard 90-day retention. By keeping the old versions and any deleted files for 13 months, when tax time comes around the following year and there's a problem, we can still get the original file back for them. So again, I could go on talking about Cloudberry Backup for a long time, but in the interest of time, I'll just wrap up by saying that Cloudberry Backup has worked extremely well for us for the past 3 years and continues to get better with every release. Thanks, Eugene.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve, for sharing your experience and providing the feedback.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Yep. So with that, I'm gonna cover some of the questions that we have received recently. So just quickly, so there was a question from Ronaldo. Does Cloudberry work with SpiderOak? I just made a quick review. Looks like it's something like Dropbox.
Yeah, SpiderOak is a provider that focuses especially on security. I don't think Cloudberry works with SpiderOak. Maybe you can correct me, but they coined the term zero knowledge privacy. So they are that's their main selling proposition, essentially, that they do not know, as Steve mentioned also in his review, they do not know the encryption keys of their clients. So in theory, nobody but the user knows the data that is uploaded, even though they were forced to open up the kimono, so to speak, and show files to agencies or what have you. They couldn't because it would only show gibberish because of that zero knowledge privacy.
Yeah, I can just confirm that's why we don't do that. We don't support that that particular storage provider. However, as we are, in the demo part right now, so one of the questions that we had recently, about the how can I protect my computer? And there was, as far as I remember, a question about what storage providers that you support. So here's the list of providers that we support today. Some of those icons are not really providers, rather technologies, like, for example, OpenStack or S3-like or S3 compatible, like here, or like that one. And with these two icons, we actually get even wider list of supported providers and companies that provide storage facilities and storage services. But here's the list that we do right now. So officially, I believe that we state our list of storage providers and technologies, something like more than 50 different storage providers and technologies, cloud providers and cloud technologies. So I moved actually to the Cloudberry product, and the very first product that I want to demonstrate here is Cloudberry Backup. So Cloudberry Backup essentially is the product to protect either files or the entire computer or the applications. So for example, SQL or Exchange. You can see on your screen the interface of the product, and you can see two icons in my toolbar, which is SQL and Exchange. So these two icons help me to work with my application, just in case if I have those applications. But the idea of the application is really simple. We set up the storage account, which is again one of the storage provider from that list, and then we set up the backup plan accordingly. And we may work with just files, or there is also image-based icon which allows me to back up my entire Windows computer, or just a few drives. Let's say I want to protect my C drive. I want to back up my C drive and everything which is related to that C drive, for making either restore the entire computer, or just volume, or just few files. So there are different options for the recovery available. So I recently set up a few different storage accounts. So I have local file system account. It's just to demonstrate the on-site backup. So the on-site backup, which is my local account, is just a bunch of disks, and in fact, it's just a separate computer. And I have set up my backup of entire C share path. So that's my data source, and it backs up to my local file system. So it's just an example of on-site backup. And the other one that I have here is the backup to Amazon S3. So it's just an example of cloud backup or offsite backup, where we have all our backup sitting somewhere else. So let's just take a look at the backup wizard, maybe just few things that we have discussed recently. So I've been talking about the retention policy, and there was a question about that. Just really to go through the things that we may consider or we may use during the retention setup. So essentially, it's just a way to define how many copies I'd like to have on my backup destination. So in Cloudberry example, we have the option to set up number of versions for each file. So for example, I have my I have a backup, and within that backup I have files, and those files are frequently changed, and I can set up how many copies or how many versions of that file during my retention policy I want to keep on my backup destination. I can actually start to purge my data, just in case I don't really want to keep my old points of that file, let's say older than 1 month, or older than 1 day, or older than 1 week. I can just start to delete those files from my cloud destination. It's also part of the retention policy. And as you can guess, the overall idea here is just to clean the storage destination as clear as possible. So essentially, it helps me to clean up the backup set, to clean up the storage for upcoming new points for the restore. So from the Cloudberry perspective, what else I'd like to highlight here is that we provide a way to again, I mentioned the image-based backup, where we can work with the entire system, where we can set up the C drive, D drive, for example. Everything which is related to my computer can be selected and added to the backup set, the backup plan, and having that backup sitting somewhere else, either on site or in the cloud, I can always restore my computer, either to dissimilar hardware. So this is how we position image-based backup from the recovery perspective, or we can work with cloud providers like Amazon or Microsoft Azure, where we can restore virtual machines. So from my computer, from image-based backup of my computer, I can restore virtual machine in the cloud. So for example, I want to see how my computer works in the cloud. So I want to, let's say, to try the P2C migration, like physical to cloud migration. I want to see how it fits, how it works. It's just a really good use case. You may want to see how this product helps you to migrate. So again, so Amazon EC2 or Microsoft Azure Virtual Machine, these are two icons available for the recovery from image-based backup. With that, I just want to close that one quickly and highlight another product that I mentioned today is Cloudberry Explorer. So that might be very useful if you work with cloud storage and you want to see, the list of files in the storage provider. Sorry, in the storage account. You want to see your backups. You want to, let's say, you want to work with your files. You want to, get a copy of those files. You want to copy data from your local computer to that storage provider. So with that particular task, you can use Cloudberry Explorer because it's just a simple file manager. Very intuitive, friendly, easy to use. And as you can see, I can work again with that really wide list of storage provider that you've seen in the backup interface. So what if I don't really run Windows computer? So that's not a problem. Even if you're a Mac user or Linux user, we have two solutions for those platforms as well. So on your screen right now, you can see the interface for Mac backup. Again, there's really wide list of supported platforms, supported technologies, and storage providers that you can define a storage destination for your computer. In my case, I have two accounts, Google and AWS S3 set up recently, and I've got a just single backup here. Let's just take a look at the configuration what we have. Again, so I just define the backup for simple folder. So that folder somewhere here. So yeah, so that's actually a set of different images. And I just define the backup set to keep copies of this information in AWS S3. I didn't enable anything like compression or encryption. It's just full copies of this data going to the cloud. Again, we can set up the retention policy here by setting the number of copies to keep and the number of versions to keep on the storage, and the number of days that we want to keep those copies, and when we want to start purging that information from the storage. So we can define all the things. Yeah, we haven't discussed the scheduler or the way to set up the backup plan frequency, or which is also part of the retention. So essentially, a backup solution automation. And so on that particular wizard for Mac, as well as for Windows, there's way to set up the frequency and when the backup should run. So it can be run daily, weekly, monthly, etc. So that's it really. So the backup plan is set up. We can either run it or wait for the next run according to the scheduler.
Yeah, and just to make that clear for the audience, maybe that this is something that you cannot do out of the box with like Amazon S3. So, and this is obviously how Cloudberry helps you. Or if you're not using S3, if you're using, for example, Amazon Cloud Drive, which is a little more consumer driven, and I think they offer like unlimited cloud storage right now. So that obviously, while you can obviously drag and drop files into Amazon into the Amazon Cloud Drive, it does not have those special scheduling capabilities that you just showed us, and it doesn't offer you the flexibility that Cloudberry offers.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe it's just a good point to quickly go through the configuration setup. So, for example, you've been talking about Google. Google Drive, like more consumer product. So in my example, I have AWS, which is, it's not Google, is obviously a different provider. But what we have here, we have the options to set up the account accordingly. So for example, for AWS S3 setup, we just need two things: access and secret key. So this information can be obtained from the AWS console. If we go to, let's say, to the Google Cloud, we have different other things to set up here. So we may work with access and secret key. So the same way like you see for AWS, or we may work with authentication over OAuth. It can be either service account or application. So there are different ways to set up the storage destinations. All this information can be found in Cloudberry user guides, or it can be obtained from the support team, so that's not a problem. And just really last thing that I want to highlight here is when we want to restore the information, we just work with the storage account, and we define the file. And if we have more than one version of that file, we define the version, and we just create a restore plan and get the file back accordingly, or placed to the separate location. Depends on what we set to our return, to our restore task.
There's a question by Günther. He's asking if, or rather why there's a difference between the user interface looking differently between Mac and Windows in terms of usability. A common user interface across all platforms would be a little better. Do you have? Does it look that differently? I'm not quite sure if that's correct, but he states that here in his question.
Yeah, so that's correct. So the Windows interface looks differently, and if you take a look at the toolbar, you may find more icons and more options available, just because we started to develop Windows platform the way earlier than Mac and Linux. I believe that even if you compare numbers that we have next to the version, next to the product name, like Cloudberry Backup for Windows, which is 5.5 right now, and the Mac version is just 2.0. So the second version and the 5.5. So just because we started Windows platform development earlier, and we have more different features and more application support and more ways of restore. When for Mac version, so there is only way to backup files, but you still have all these options from the cloud perspective. So you can select any storage of your choice, you can set up different plans, and so on and so forth.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, Eugene, thank you very much for this demonstration, and especially also for the theoretical part. I think that cleared up a lot of question about backup, cloud backup, and offsite backup, and a couple of the strategies. And also thank you for showing Cloudberry as a demonstration, because I think it will be a very handy tool for all the people that are that do not want to rely on one single cloud backup platform, or on one backup only. So yeah, I think we can open the forum a little bit for questions, if there are any, and have them answered right now. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment box. So we've already answered the question from Günther, and then there is a question by Atul. He is looking for a backup system that will have a live person to help in case of an accidental loss of data. So that is, I believe, a question rather for the cloud backup provider. So the thing is, Cloudberry itself does not offer support, I believe, for loss of data, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, well, first of all, we are storage agnostic, and we don't provide a storage. So we provide a tool. So the tool that helps you to make your backups accordingly to your storage destinations. And yeah, we provide support. So the tool, provide support for the tool itself, like whether the tool works properly and there are no issues in the tool. If there are issues, we work with with IT administrator or the person who uses our product. So maybe
correct.
Atul, if you can just clarify a little bit your question, we can answer.
Yeah, so what I think is, what I believe he means is that I think with Cloudberry Backup you can also back up, for example, to a local machine, right? Exactly. So for example, what you could do is you could use Cloudberry Backup for the on-site backup solution, and then, for example, pick a provider on the list from, for example, on cloudwoods.net, where we compare the online backup solutions that specifically offers like 24/7 live support for your files. So you would then have someone to talk to you, essentially, if there is data loss or anything else. But the first thing that you always have is your local backup that you did with Cloudberry. And you can most likely rely on that local backup, and only as a fallback solution. You could then talk to a representative from that online backup solution that you used as a secondary backup. Maybe that answers the question.
Yep.
So Rolando asks another question. What options does Cloudberry in terms of naming and conventions for backed up files and folder arrangements have? Maybe he's referring to maybe some special characters, if that's possible. I'm not sure. Maybe you could clarify the question a little further.
So one of the guests that I have is also about that. I think well, what we do actually, programmatically, when we take certain file which has, for example, like certain characters like tilde or slashes or some non-UTF-8 symbols, we screen them, just to make sure that we can handle those files and they do not have any problems with the code, especially when we make HTTP requests working with storage providers. Because, well, anytime when you place your file, when you make your backup, so each file is actually going to be processed by HTTP request. So it's just the way the cloud provider works. And well, if that refers to the to the different special symbols that you may have in your files and folders, we had that in past, some issues, but when we get the the response from the customers and prospects, we're trying to handle them. And so far, last half of year, I haven't seen any problems with well, any of those special characters. Well, of course, there are some exceptions for new storage providers that we start to support. I don't really want to name those storage providers, but I can just admit that they are from the S3 compatible section and from the OpenStack compatible section. Yeah, in those cases, we may see some problems, but for majority of technologies that we have on the list, so far has been fixed. And if there are any cases, just let us know. and we can handle that accordingly.
So Rolando, he clarified his question a little bit. He asks, how much flexibility does Cloudberry allow when renaming files and folder structures? So, for example, file1.txt is renamed to file1 underscore 01 underscore 01 underscore 2017.txt. I think Cloudberry doesn't. I think Cloudberry doesn't care really how you name your files. I would think.
Yeah, maybe. Well, there is another guess. Is maybe this is related to the, to the way Cloudberry detects the regional information. Like, for example, initially there was file one, and then the file has been renamed, and will we identify that file as a source? Maybe this is related to that case. Maybe not. Yeah, but.
So in general, there are no problems. So there's full flexibility on renaming files. I would suppose that's the answer.
Yes, absolutely. Except few storage technologies. Again, those are new players that we start to support, and sometimes we see some problems, but we actually try to handle them by screening those symbols and by using them, programmatically with a special approach. So it's just a matter of time if there are any requests about that. So we usually try to fix them accordingly and shortly.
Okay, there's another question by Amarachi. He's asking, based on your demonstration, are Cloudberry, Amazon S3, and excuse me, and Google Cloud integrated to work together, or are they different entities, providers, where one can choose either one provider or the other?
So they are different. It's just I set up those two providers just to explain it, to show the variety of options available from the Cloudberry perspective. However, there might be a case when you want to migrate your data from, let's say, from Google to AWS or vice versa, and that's why we have cloud-to-cloud backup setups. Just another example. But they are independent entities, and it's just to show how product flexible and how you can set up your backup sets accordingly.
All right. There's one follow-up question by Rolando. He's asking about changing the folder structure from the live files to the to the archive files, whether that's possible or not.
So there is if I understood the question correctly, so there's one of the options that we started to support recently is called archiving. So for example, you have 1,000 files and you plan to, let's say, to use them only for audit, and you don't really want to, well, what we can do, we can combine all these 1,000 files into one archive and upload them to the cloud, if I understood the question correctly, if that's about that. I would suggest, if there are still questions and if there are further questions, you can actually see the email address that you can use to liaise with us. You can send your inquiry, and either myself or someone from Solutions Architect team will be happy to assist and provide more details.
Yeah, I think that's the best approach.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. I would say this concludes our first Cloudberry webinar. We're going to have more Cloudberry related webinars in the near future, and obviously we'll all let you know in our email list about the upcoming webinars where we cover different topics regarding cloud storage and cloud backup. So if you guys are interested, make sure you subscribe to our CloudWoods newsletter, and you're going to be let know the new dates of the webinars. Again, thank you, Eugene, for hosting this webinar with us and being a very, very knowledgeable guidance here in terms of backup and shed some light onto several backup topics. Maybe any last words?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to thank you, Mauricio, for arranging that for us, and for gathering such a nice audience with such great questions. And thanks very much for your great role in that webinar. And that's it, really. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good day ahead.